All right, take two. All right, welcome everybody. I'm JD Flynn. This is my talk dealing with mental illness, or how I learned to dislike myself less. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I am a technical architect for the company I work for, which technically means I'm not an architect, just a developer with a fancy title. If you want to tweet, I'm at JDDoesDev. On any Slack that I'm on, I'm Dorf. And also these two little tags, TC Drupal and OSMI Help. Has anybody here heard of OSMI? I'm going to go into detail a bit later about them. Great organization. So I like to start off with a big friendly greeting, so hello.
Hello.
Hello, okay. Because it is going to get a little bit serious in here, so start off friendly. I also like to cover my ass with a couple of disclaimers. I'm not a doctor, not a mental health professional, not a medical professional, not a legal professional. I tend to swear without thinking about it, so will anybody be really offended by that? Okay. And I get a little bit deep with this, so it gets kind of personal. Why are we here? This isn't, some philosophical question that's going to spark an existential crisis for anybody in here, I hope. I mean, why are we here right now? And I'm here because I want to talk with you about something that's very important to me, and hopefully it's important to you. I hope that you're here because you want to take part in a conversation, or at least maybe learn something. And I'm also here to tell a story because I hope that my story helps somebody in a way that somebody else's story helped me. So, let's have a conversation. You're all going to learn quite a bit about me, and I like to have an idea of who I'm talking with. So, how many of you are developers, designers, anything kind of related to making the sites, programming, anything like that? Okay. Any of you project managers, account owners, producers, anything like that? Anybody in HR? Okay. I think this is something that HR professionals should really attend, but it also gives me a little bit of freedom to shit on them a bit. But anybody in upper management, managers, presidents, CEOs? Yeah. Okay. So, with the exception of two people in here, I don't know any of you. So you might be asking, who is this guy? I've been doing Drupal and PHP for about 6 years now. I've been doing HTML since the 90s. I got my intro to programming. Does anybody remember the magazine or TV show 321 Contact? So the magazine, at the very back page, every issue had a basic program in it, like written out, and you would have to take that and transpose it from paper to whatever editor you were using. And for me, it was QBasic, and hope that you didn't mess anything up. So it was really fun and really frustrating when you hit F5 and get an error. So really nice intro to debugging. I also help organize MidCamp. I also help organize, which is the Chicago Drupal equivalent to this. Help organize the Drupal Chicago meetup. And before this career, in a past life, I was a paramedic and a firefighter. Did that for about 10 years. Also, I have mental illnesses, plural. The reason I care about this is because for a very, very long time I suffered in silence. I was in denial. I was afraid that admitting I had an illness would make it real. I was afraid that admitting these things in my head were things would, give them value or give them power. It was also, perfect health until a doctor tells you otherwise. I didn't want to go get checked out because I had a clean bill of health until that point. I also worried that if I told people how I was feeling or what I was thinking, that they'd treat me differently. But something that I learned, something that I need to repeat to myself over and over again is I'm not weak, I'm sick, I'm not damaged, I have a disease, and most importantly, it's not a choice, it's a condition. Hopefully have somewhat of an idea of what mental illness is, but I'm going to talk about it a lot. And the actual definition is a wide range of mental health conditions or disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. There's a book, 5th edition now, called the DSM-5, which stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The last version was published in 2013. The first one came in 1952, so that's a pretty short time. Has anybody heard of the book? Yeah, it sits about this high off the floor, and it has criteria for diagnosing mental illnesses, and you have to meet certain criteria before you can get a diagnosis. I'm also going to be talking about the stigma around mental illness, but not everybody realizes why there is one or what the stigma is. For centuries, people with mental illness were treated as less than. Right? There were stereotypes that people with mental illness were dangerous. A lot of that came from, they would put people in asylums next to criminals. They would put, group them together, and the care just wasn't there. It was more just sweep them under the rug and, untreated. Yes, people with mental illness untreated can be dangerous to themselves or others, but if you're not treating them and not treating them like people, that's what happens. People weren't seen as people either. They were seen as their disease. They were seen as their condition. And there's a lot of power to the way that you describe something. So, saying the words a schizophrenic compared to somebody with schizophrenia, a person with schizophrenia, they're bipolar as opposed to someone with bipolar disorder, or grouping the mentally ill compared to people with mental illness. And it led to people using mental illness as an insult. And for those of us who have mental illness, there's also a self-stigma that you start feeling that your disease defines you, and that's because of that person first versus disease first terminology. And because you are your disease, you become a burden. And there's something called courtesy stigma, which is where family members, loved ones, caregivers, they feel shame or guilt for contributing to the illness. They blame themselves. What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? How did this happen? So that's just a TLDR of what the stigma is and what we're dealing with. So if you're the person I imagine for this slide, you might be asking, just what mental illnesses do you have? I have major depression, anxiety disorder, PTSD, ADHD, and I'm one square away from mental illness bingo. And I say that because there's a lot of comorbidity and coexisting conditions that many illnesses mimic each other and many go together. My PTSD is very similar to ADHD, so instead of not treating one or the other, treating for both. Anxiety can also mimic a lot of depressive. There's a lot of things that happen. So, for clarity, major depression. It's feelings of low self-worth or guilt and a reduced ability to enjoy life every day for at least 2 weeks. That's major depression. There's a difference between depression, having depressive time, and being diagnosed with major depression. Anxiety disorder, characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with your daily activities. This comes from one little green spot, well, it's not green, but in your brain, called the amygdala. Also referred to as a lizard brain because it is, your reptilian brain has 4 basic instincts: fight or flight, feed or breed. I'm either going to fight it, I'm going to run away from it, I'm going to eat it, or I'm going to make babies with it. That's all the little chunk of your brain is saying. And for people with anxiety, the fight or flight is pretty strong, and usually it's flight. PTSD, failure to recover after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. I had a very hard time understanding this one until a psychologist explained it to me in computer terms right after he asked me to fix his printer. And he made the brain into a computer. So think of your short-term memory as your RAM. It's really quick. Things move back and forth to the CPU, quick access. Your long-term memory is your storage, a little bit slower, takes a little bit more time to get stuff to it. So when somebody has PTSD, the event gets stuck in their short-term memory. It gets stuck in their RAM. So sight, sound, smell, anything can make a person relive that event. Not just think about it, but actually relive it over and over in their head. ADHD, varying degrees of hyperactivity, impulsivity, or inattention that lead to difficulty in academic, emotional, and social functioning. When I was a kid, this was looked at as being a bit off, daydreaming, being inattentive, being lazy because I would get bored with homework and not do it, not turn it in. Testing time would come and get all the way through, but I didn't have that homework edit. Or just needing to burn off some energy. It wasn't really looked at as, well, maybe we should get checked out. Now, in general, I've only been getting treatment for a short time, relatively speaking. I didn't start getting treatment until about 4 or 5 years ago at most. Why do I mention this? Because way back around slide 2 or 3, I said it's going to get personal. It's because my normal was not normal. For as long as I can remember, I felt this way until I admitted that I needed to get some kind of treatment. This is how I was. There's definitely a nature versus nurture debate, but the nurture versus nature, blah blah blah. My childhood was really rough. I witnessed physical and verbal abuse. I was emotionally abused, which can take many forms, and I went through a lot of them. I was left alone a lot from a very young age, which led to having a very hard time making connections, led to few friends. I was overweight, ugly, bad hygiene because I didn't have the proper guidance to what I should be doing. I was bullied a lot because of all of the above. I didn't know how to handle emotions, so I cried a lot, lashed out, anything to keep people away from me. And I thought it was all my fault. I was defective, I was unlikable, I was the one scaring people away. I never had a sense of safety at home, so I became afraid of absolutely everything. And I had one enemy in particular. You ready to meet him? My nemesis, the mirror. Every time I looked in this thing, talk back to me. You're worthless, ugly, nobody likes you, I hate you. Every time. I hated what I saw. I couldn't understand how anyone could like me, let alone want to be around me. But it wasn't the mirror saying it, it was my reflection, so it was me, my inner voice telling me all these things over and over again, and I believed it. It's still hard for me to not say this stuff when I walk past the mirror, go into the bathroom. And this was the norm for most of my life. Sometimes I would try to fake confidence and it didn't work. Sometimes I would act like things didn't bother me when they really, really did. Occasionally I would get angry. By occasionally I mean all the time I was angry. I was paranoid and afraid about absolutely everything. Because of the depression, I'd have deep, deep, deep valleys, which would lead me to feeling useless, which would lead me to being unable to function. I felt like I messed up everything I touched. Anything that I did would get broken. Unable to focus on anything. And because I couldn't focus, I was in fear of losing my job because I had bad output. I wasn't really putting out as many commits as other people. I wasn't doing as much work as other people because I couldn't focus. And it's a vicious cycle. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I also mentioned that in my previous life I was a paramedic. And I don't know if you know a lot of people in public service, and I haven't really been active in that community in a few years. But when I was there, it was a level of pride. You could not have mental illness. You could not admit to it. You are the medic. You help people. You don't get sick. You don't need treatment. We're above it until we're not. And I could name way too many people who I worked with who died of suicide because they were above it until it was too late. Then something happened. And when I say something, I mean some things. I wish I could say it was a single moment, but it really wasn't. It was a series of events that led up to it, but there's one in particular that really stands out to me. I went back to school in my late 20s, decided to get a degree because I wanted off the ambulance, and drove up to community college, had a class that day, nothing big, just ordinary, no test, no speech, math, normal. But I sat in my car, put it in park, and then just this wave of fear came over me. And I was looking for any excuse possible not to go in there. Did I leave the oven on at home? Did I, maybe I need to go pick up something. Oh, I think I forgot my pencil. Whatever. Everything in my brain was telling me, do not walk in there. And the lizard brain was acting up saying, bear's going to eat you if you walk in there. And I just kind of realized, after I threw it in reverse, drove back home, realized this isn't quite right. And then from then on, I started rethinking a lot of things. And then I was fortunate because after I graduated, I changed careers. I got into development. And to kind of get my start in development, I started hanging out on online developer communities. And I started noticing that developer and tech in general is a lot more inclusive and understanding than my previous life, which is great. I wish that other fields would be as awesome as this, but getting there slowly. Then I had a health scare. TLDR, found a lump where there shouldn't be a lump, got scared, everything's fine, but I started reevaluating a lot of things. And with that, I accepted that I needed help. The first thing is the hardest, because I finally, started with the car. Not everybody was driving away from the school, so obviously it was something happening with me. There wasn't a bear inside, I hope. People didn't get as angry as I did, as easily as I did. People weren't affected by everyday things like I was. And I kind of had an epiphany that maybe everybody else wasn't the issue, maybe it was me. If everywhere you're walking smells like dog shit, maybe check your own shoes. And for a lot of people, that was the hardest part. All the signs were there, but I couldn't see them. They were just staring at me, blinking, bright neon signs, but I couldn't see them. Constantly afraid. Crippling fear of everyday things. Having the same reaction going into a social situation that somebody should be having going into a pit of lions, which led me to canceling plans a lot and led me to be paranoid about absolutely everything, which made me angry. I wasn't a happy person. Anything could set me off. Think of that lizard brain again. Fight or flight, feed or breed. If I can't make babies with it or eat it, I'm gonna run away or fight. And so there was a lot of anger, which led to a little bit of hate, which was usually a misunderstanding. I did get angry and hateful sometimes, but I never was full of hate. I never disliked people or specifically for reasons. But I realized I was suffering, and there was something that I could do about it. I could get treatment. And I learned this from a wise Muppet. So finally, I got treatment. I take medication, and I'm a huge fan of Better Living Through Chemistry. I see a therapist, which helps out tremendously. I find outlets. I'm active in the local Drupal community. I do this kind of thing, and I start the conversation by doing this kind of thing, opening up roundtables. If anybody wants to talk about it anywhere, I will facilitate a conversation. But it wasn't easy. I don't know if you know this, but the American healthcare system is not stellar. So I was able to get into a therapist pretty quickly. As soon as I found one on psychologytoday.com, which is an amazing site, I was able to get in within a week. They said, hey, you've got this. You need to take these meds. But where I live, psychologists can't prescribe medication. So I had to get a general practitioner, which I didn't have until that point. There was an 8-week waiting period before I could get in for my initial consult with that general practitioner. So here I am sitting with diagnosis, but no treatment other than therapy. Therapy's great, therapy's wonderful, but if your chemicals are off, therapy needs a little booster. But during this time, I attended a talk by a guy named Ed Finkler. Do any of you know him? Heard of him? He's a really good guy. He started OSMI originally in 2014, went nonprofit in 2016, and like I said, I'll get into OSMI a little bit later, more in depth. But this talk, when I went to it, it was on mental illness, mental health, and I wasn't the only one attending there, so it helped me realize something very important, and that's that we're not alone. Since getting diagnosed and getting rid of the self-stigma, I've realized that I'm not alone, which means anybody in this room with mental illness is not alone. And nobody is the only one going through this. To put it in a Drupal way, may have different methods and variables, but the interfaces are kind of the same. And I realized that I was afraid because of the way that people might view me. But I don't feel that way anymore because talking to people and organizations like OSMI. Since getting treatment, well, before getting treatment, I wanted to hide in shame because of who I am and what I have and how I feel. But now I just realize it's a part of me, and I'm not too proud to admit that I need help anymore. The valleys, fortunately, are not as deep. Not to say I don't have valleys, not to say I don't have bad days. I have very bad days occasionally, but they're much less frequent and much more manageable. And the inverse of depression, or the other side of depression, is not quite the bipolar scale, but if you have severe depression, you can also have those high days, especially with ADHD. You can have those periods of things going very well, being extremely happy, being extremely excited. And, it was a very, very, very large wave. But now it's a little bit lower. The bad thing is I don't have those superpowers anymore. The good thing is the time is more even, so I'm more manageable with my time. I'm able to do more over longer periods. My anxiety has gone down a ton. Obviously, I wouldn't be standing in front of a room full of strangers if it hadn't. Still shows up occasionally. I've become much more comfortable in social situations. I'm still very introverted, so after this, I'm probably going to hide for a little while. I don't have nearly as many anxiety attacks as I used to, and I'm not unreasonably afraid of doing normal things. I don't think that there's a lion in the supermarket anymore, or at least my brain doesn't think that. It's not trying to tell me that. And now I work with OSMI. So I've been talking about OSMI a lot. It stands for Open Sourcing Mental Illness. Has a couple primary directives, and basically we're focused on erasing the stigma around mental illness in the tech community. By doing speaking, we have a couple handbooks that we put out. It was founded, like I said, by Ed Finkler, who realized that there was a gap in research done because talking to people who say, hey, I'm in tech and I feel this way, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but now OSMI does research. OSMI also, for KubeCon, the Linux Foundation commissioned us to write a handbook specific to conference organizers and conferences and the mental health and well-being of conference attendees and organizers. And that's going to be open sourced out. So, we try to do the best we can. And it's run by some amazing people. Ed Finkler, Joe Ferguson. We've got several volunteers, and it's great. And also, since getting treatment, I could tolerate this thing a little bit more. And if you can't read that, even though we don't agree on everything, you have some valid opinions and shouldn't be afraid to share them occasionally. I say this a lot, I mean this in general, but more specifically in the tech community. But why tech specifically? Like I said, Ed noticed a disconnect between, there are a lot of people here saying that I have this, I'm dealing with this, but we don't know, nothing's really being done about it. There's also, some evidence that creatives appear to be more prone to depression and anxiety. And I say creatives as a broad term because in development, you have to be creative. You have to think of new ways to do things. Granted, you have your palette of functions, variables, what to start with, but you've got to figure stuff out. And intelligent and creative people tend to think over situations and overthink more than others. And what I mean by that is we look for cause and effect. We look for the chain of events that leads to something. A lot of people could just let go of that and not look for that cause-effect relationship, but a lot of us, creative thinkers, tend to replay these events. And that could go from, why isn't this outputting what I'm hoping for in the render array to, okay, I just got fired, or I just got bad news. What are the events that led up to this? And replaying that over and over, trying to figure it out, but always reliving that event. And reliving it can lead to depression. It can lead to feeling hopeless. It can lead to a lot of bad feelings, a lot of hard days. And a lot of us are prone to that. There's also this guy. Anybody heard of imposter syndrome? Yeah. TLDR, this feeling you don't deserve to be doing what you're doing. I have that. I don't really know how to deal with this. For me, one of the hardest things to do is accept a compliment. I usually shrug it off, laugh, and say, no, I don't deserve that. No, I used to have a very hard time asking for help because I thought that if I ask for help, if there's something I don't know and I ask somebody, they're going to see right through me and they're going to see that I'm a fraud. But now I know asking for help isn't weakness. I guarantee everybody in this room knows something that somebody else doesn't. Everybody in this room is better at something than somebody else is. And that's fine. We're here to learn from each other. People are here, if you're in a good company or good environment, asking for help isn't going to be seen as a sign of weakness. It's going to be seen as, oh, you want to learn something just because you don't know this particular, let's fix that. And it's okay to show that you have limits. All right, I've been going for a while now, so I want to ask all of you some questions. Would you tell someone with glasses or contacts to try looking harder? Would you ask somebody in a wheelchair why they decided not to walk? Would you tell someone with diabetes or a heart condition to stop taking their meds and just snap out of it? Seems kind of silly, right? Let's do some Mad Libs. Would you tell someone with depression to try being happy? Would you ask someone in a panic attack if they've considered trying harder to not have anxiety? Have you thought about smiling? Would you tell someone with ADHD to stop taking their medicine and just try to focus? I mean, it seems silly, but this happens a lot. I mean, if anybody here has been on social media, you've probably seen something like this. This is an antidepressant. This is shit. Man, I don't need pills to be happy. I do. And one of my personal favorites, what if I told you you don't need antidepressants if you lift? Now, I'm not here to shame anybody who goes to the gym or, that works for them, but I need antidepressants. All these say the same thing. It's your decision to feel this way. It's your decision to be on medication. It's your decision that your serotonin levels are low, or that your brain's re-uptaking your serotonin so that you don't process things the correct way. It's saying that you don't really need help. It's something you can just will yourself out of. But I can vouch for the effects of medication. But everyone is different, and what works for me may not work for the next person. Fully admit that. Maybe running works for somebody. It doesn't work for me. Medication works. Maybe the meds I'm on won't work for somebody else. That's fine. There's a few side effects, but the benefits are so much heavier than the side effects. And we have our own. In case you can't read that, if you can't make your own neurotransmitters, store-bought is fine. So I've talked about the stigma for quite a bit. How do we erase it? No, need to be stronger than fear. And by that, I don't mean beat your fear at arm wrestling. I mean starting the conversation or listening. Let people know they matter. People are matter, yeah, but let people know they matter. Don't be ashamed. If you have a mental illness, you're not damaged, you have a disease. Remember that, it's not a choice, it's a condition. Try to be respectful with your words, because not all disabilities are visible. Not all cuts bleed. Try to be respectful of what you say or how you portray diseases. Sad is not necessarily the same as depressed. Being distracted by something making loud noises is not quite the same as having full-on ADHD, where it feels like everything in the room is yelling for my attention at the same time. One of the biggest ones, and this bugs me more than a lot of things, is being organized is not the same as OCD. And I did a talk for Marketo. They had an online remote kind of mental health day. And the woman who went before me, Marissa Lyman, she was talking about OCD and how she deals with it. And I never really knew how to explain it. I don't have it, never claimed to have it, but I never really knew how to explain it until she put it this way. Imagine that you are deathly allergic to blueberries. Plate of blueberries sitting in front of you, and your brain is telling you if you don't eat every blueberry on that plate, everything you know and love will die. Everything will be destroyed. And that's what OCD is. That's a compulsion. And to me, that just resonated. I mean, I'm still talking about it to this day, but just as that being an explanation of what she goes through. She didn't go into her compulsion, what it actually is, but just having that feeling frightens me. And if you do feel that you have a disease, get treatment. Please, it helps. So I've been saying a lot of anecdotal evidence, but facts help show that I'm not full of shit. Like I say, OSMI, we do a survey annually. So I've got some science. These are some results from the 2017 survey with a little help from 2016. There were a couple questions that weren't asked last year. And survey results from previous years are available on Kaggle, which if you're not familiar with Kaggle, it's like GitHub for data sets. So we have people who will go through, tabulate stuff, look for correlation, and people a lot smarter than me. The 2017 had about 800 responses. It was made available to several different communities in the US. All responses are self-reported. Now, one of the questions is, would you bring up a physical health issue with a potential employer at an interview? Yes is 23%, maybe 40%, no 37%. But if you change that to mental health issue, that no gets really big and that yes gets really small. 5% said yes. Not saying that you have to disclose, first time meeting a potential employer, but people are pretty uncomfortable with it. Do you feel that being identified as a person with a mental health issue would hurt your career? Now, this is something that I worry about every time I give this talk, because if you Google J.D. Flynn mental illness, mental health, you'll probably get about 15 different versions on YouTube, thanks to Kevin Thal, of me doing a talk like this. But it's great to know that my cards are out on the table, and if somebody hires me after knowing, then it's a great place to be. So, tried to make the font on here as big as I could without overlapping, but 7% say that it has hurt their career. 10% say they don't think it would. 2% say it has not. 39% say they think it would. Only 12% of people say no. That speaks volumes to me. Do you think discussing a physical health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? Huge chunk say no, 71%. Only 4% said yes. Do you think discussing a mental health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? 23%. So it was about 4% in the last one, over 5 times more, almost 6 times more, so that there would definitely be negative consequences. Having been diagnosed with a mental health condition. This is self-reported. The US average is about 20%, and this is from 800 responses. 43% of people who responded said yes, they've been diagnosed. Do you think you have a mental health condition? Again, self-reported, average around 20%, 800 responses, and one slice of the pie includes people who answered yes to diagnosed. Add on possibly and don't know, that's a big number. That's a big chunk of us. Over 50%, even with just a possibly, either have been diagnosed or think we have an issue. So, what do these mean though? Put them all together. It means that we're afraid to talk about mental illness, especially in the workplace. But it also means we're not alone. I mean, over 50% either have been diagnosed or think they have. But we're afraid of the stigma, and we're afraid that being honest will make people change their opinion of us. If you have anxiety, worrying what somebody thinks can just be crippling. Some of our minds go straight to the worst case scenario, like mine especially. Has anybody ever had a hard time logging into their work email? The last time it happened, I was sending out my resume because I figured that they just erased my email and I'm gone. That's where my mind goes. That's how it works. It's kind of a binary mind where if it's not great, it's horrible. And I'm getting better at that gray area in between. Still working on that. We're also afraid we might get sent to the HR department. How many in here are on a first name basis with your HR rep? That's more than usual. And that could be good or bad, depending on why you're talking to them. But for me, after I started getting treatment, I was during that gray period, I said, hey, I've been diagnosed. I went to my direct boss, somebody I talked with on a daily basis. Hey, I've been diagnosed with this. I am having a really bad day. I need to recover just for a day. And it was a situation where they're like, okay, well, that's interesting. Take your time off and whatever. But almost immediately after hanging up, I got an email and a phone call from the HR rep, somebody who I hadn't spoken with in about 18 months since I was hired, who started laying out, okay, this is what we're going to do now. This is going to be your prescribed regimen for how you're going to work, and we're going to keeping track of absolutely everything you're doing. And it wasn't great. Also, having to talk to somebody that I never talked to about some pretty deep issues was not awesome. In 2015, this number, 17.9, translates to 43.4 million adults. with any mental illness. That's a lot. Now, why should a workplace care? Let's put a dollar sign on it. Depression alone impacts an estimated 9.5% of the American adult population, which causes 200 million lost work days per year, which can cost employers up to $44 billion, with a B, $44 billion annually. That's a lot of money. Well, if you're this slide, you're asking me, what can we do? I think that something any workplace could do would be create a culture of inclusiveness. If the workplace is open and they create this culture, then an employee might feel a little bit better being open. My situation used to be that I would do very little for days. I'd get angry that I couldn't function, I couldn't do things, which would leave me not doing more. And I would get afraid because I wasn't succeeding. I was doing stuff on my timesheet, but I wasn't really putting out anything. So if you look at it, over the course of about 36 hours, I did maybe 12 hours of work and a lot of just, what am I going to do, what am I going to do? If I would have felt comfortable from earlier on saying, I need a day off, 8 hours of PTO, 32 hours of actual work after recharging. That's billable hours. So that's a pretty big difference. And if a workplace gives you that option, or they make you feel comfortable enough to say that, that's awesome. Another thing that everybody in this room can do to help, please, is take the 2019 OSMI survey at osmi.org/research. It's not a short survey, it's about 20 minutes long, a lot of questions, it's anonymous, but it's really important. It helps us direct where we're going and where to focus our efforts. I mentioned that we put out some handbooks as well at OSMI. They're DRM free, they're available on LeanPub, and really they're open source, so if you don't want to pay, you don't have to. I think it's on the GitHub repo, but the three of them are Mental Health and Tech Guidelines for Mental Wellness in the Workplace, which is trying to help create a culture of inclusivity, Guidelines for Executives and HR Professionals, and Guidelines for Employees. These are all vetted by lawyers and psychologists. They're based on the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and kind of lay out what people's rights are. The OSMI survey really helps us out. So if you have an extra 20 minutes, really appreciate if you can take that, because every answer, every response helps us out. Now, we're fortunate here. We're in open source. We're in an open source conference. And as made obvious by camps like this and events like this, community is our greatest resource. 43% of those survey respondents said mental illness diagnosis. And I keep saying this, but I'm saying it partially to remind myself, but hopefully all of you will remember it. It means that we're not alone. It also means that we're not just usernames either. I mean, we may see each other on the issue queue on Slacks, but actually being in here in person, it's amazing. We're real people. We're not ones and zeros. We're interacting. We're not at channel. We're not at whomever. We're here, having drinks, talking. It's great. It also means for those of us with mental illness, we're not damaged. Got to remember that. Again, this is mainly for me to remind myself. And together, we can erase the stigma. I have some resources up here. OSMIhelp.org is the OSMI website. A lot of great information there. There's forums on there. Psychologytoday.com. If you're looking for a therapist, it has a wonderful find a therapist tool that you can get very, very granular with, all the way down to the religious preferences of your therapist, what insurances they take, what their specialties are. It really helped me find somebody who I gelled with. If you're having thoughts or ideas of suicide, Suicide Lifeline is a resource, but if you know anybody who's acting, has a plan, 911. One thing that I didn't mention that I probably should have is mental health first aid, which is the equivalent of regular physical health first aid. It's recognizing signs and symptoms, it is de-escalating, it's seeing things ahead of time, and it's a pretty cheap class to take if you can find one around you. I think that anybody in HR, in a supervisory position, should have this, and you have to recert every couple of years. It's just like a CPR card. But it can help employers recognize the signs and symptoms of burnout is a huge one that somebody I know who took this class is looking at one of his employees and saying, listen, you need to take a break, take a breather. I know you're burning the candle at both ends. Why are you doing this? And I think it's great for anybody who has any authority to have. I think that anybody should take it, honestly, but it's something that I highly recommend for especially supervisors. So I want to thank you all for letting me talk with you. I really appreciate this. I appreciate all you sitting in on this. If you would, I have my own survey, bit.ly/JDF survey. And OSMI, I'm not here to shill for OSMI. I know I talk about them a lot. I love the organization. I'm 100% behind everything they do. But it's a 501c3, completely donation-based charity. So if you want to help this talk, I mean, part of the efforts are speaker campaigns. We have speakers who go out. OSMIhelp.org/donate is where you could do that. So we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to open up for questions, if anybody. If you want to catch me out in the atrium, yeah.
So I don't know if I can ask this or not, so just ask me. One of the things I thought was like, you said when you spoke to your supervisor, he told HR about you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it will help if supervisor, instead of telling the HR, if he had spoken to you, okay, let's handle this, you know?
I think that.
Do you think that would have been?
Yeah, it would have made a difference, but I understand that a lot of companies, they have very firm rules to cover their asses, where if somebody says, these keywords, then you go to HR immediately. And I can understand that, and I can respect that. But I think that the overarching problem is that I didn't know HR to begin with, and I didn't feel that it was really safe to talk to them because there hadn't been any efforts there to kind of make it feel that way. I do think that if my supervisor, the person that I worked with daily, were the one to say, okay, well, what do we need? What do we need to do? And that's a big thing. What do you need, or what can we do, as opposed to this is what we're going to do? Because what works on paper for somebody is not going to work for somebody else. Something that really helps me is augmenting my work schedule. So I get up earlier, I start earlier, I get off a little bit earlier. I still put in my 40 plus hours a week, but having that augmented schedule really makes my life a lot easier because I just do better work at a certain time. And I know people who they do better work later, so having the other side, starting work at 11 but going until about 7 at night, that just works for them. Not only that, but checking in occasionally, hey, how you doing? If supervisors, if you happen to be somewhere where your Slack or equivalent has a GitHub integration and you see commits, if you're in a supervisory position and you see commits happening at like 3 in the morning or repeatedly, I mean, check on that person. Why do they feel like they should be working that late at night, and especially if it's happening 3 or 4 days in a row or weeks in a row? But yeah, long story short, I think that if the supervisor would have been in a position to say, let's talk about this, what can we do, I would have felt a lot more comfortable.
And I know, like, when you said checking in at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, because I have seen this across. I have seen like they will not have any terms, any problems, but still, I know some people, they do that frequently. Like, I know some of the doctors, they might like to work night times, but still, I know they have some trouble, so they are working on night times, but they don't have any technically saying they have a problem.
Right.
How should, I'm a project manager.
Okay.
Trying to think, how can I help them out at the same time? I don't want to affect my work.
Right.
I want to help them.
This is a very loaded question, and we're at 11:30 now, so this could probably take a long time to discuss. But I think from I'm the same way. There will be times, at 3 in the morning, I will pop up out of bed. There will be a problem that I was working on yesterday I couldn't figure out, and then, somewhere from the ether, it just pops into my head. Oh, I know exactly what needs to happen. I will run to my laptop. I will type it out. I will make it happen. I will commit it. But if that is not the exception, but the norm, then I think that you might want to check in on somebody. And a lot of developers, we do a lot of shit on our off time. We do a lot of stuff, and a lot of us really enjoy it. If I have a fun problem to work on, yeah, I might spend a Sunday afternoon just working on it, and I don't feel that I have to put in the extra hours to do it. I do it because I want to, because I'm going to be learning something pretty amazing. But it's when an employee feels that they have to, or that they have this high standard to live up to, then that might be the issue. I mean, putting too much work, or if they feel that if they say that, okay, well, this ticket should take me about 4 hours, but in the back of their mind, they're saying this is going to be at least 12 hours, but they're trying to impress and work. It's just making sure that employees feel that they can be honest and that they're not killing themselves trying to meet unrealistic expectations, which a lot of times we set for ourselves. Yeah.
Where did you say that we could get the handbooks?
Let's go back to bit.ly/OSMI books. And if it's on LeanPub, which I think it is kind of a pay what you want type thing, but if that's not an option, I'm sure I can finagle some of the PDFs or the GitHub repos. All right, we're over time. I think that lunch is coming up next. So if there aren't any more questions, if there are, feel free, find me in the hallway. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.